about how you manage environments, what environments are for, and a couple of examples of so let's say common environment setups, and then I'm going to kind of open the floor for questions. In case you haven't met me before, my name is Ben. If you need to email me, it's ben@dataform.co. Feel free to email me any questions or ping us on Slack, whatever. Cool. So firstly, what on earth are these environments things for? So at the highest level, environments enable you to, let's say, be a bit more, enforce a bit more configuration on how you run your project. A couple of the most common things people use environments for are running different versions of your project code. So that's different Git versions, like versions of the code, most commonly to manage a release process, or running the same code, but maybe configured slightly differently. So if you think about the configuration options you have in the dataform.json file, it's overriding some of these. For example, people use this to enforce separation of prod data models versus dev data models, or you can mix and match both of those things. And probably there's even other use cases besides those. Cool. I should say, feel free to jump in and interrupt me and ask questions at any point. I don't have lots of slides, so we should easily get through this. I want to do a quick sidebar into explaining how Dataform runs schedules, because I think that's sort of germane to talking about environments. This slide assumes you're using schedules inside the environments.json file. If you still have schedules in schedules.json, you can more or less ignore it, but I would recommend that you migrate sometime soon, and partly because it's simpler to understand and think about. So yeah, how do schedules run when you have them inside environments.json? So our scheduler basically does two very simple things. It loads up your environments.json file on your project's master branch. So that's the the latest version of that file. It then reads through all the contents of the file, and it kind of extracts all the environments, and then runs. And then because schedules are wrapped inside environments, it runs each schedule inside the environment that sort of wraps that schedule. And by inside, I mean it uses that environment's configuration. So if you've overridden the version of the code that gets run, the schedule will be run at that version of the code. If you've overridden some of the project configuration settings, it'll be run with those overrides. So like a corollary of this is, if you want to change an environment or a schedule, you have to update environments.json, and you must push it to master. It's at the master branch that the Dataform will start obeying those changes. Cool. So I just wanted to quickly go over what you can configure inside an environment. So on the right-hand side, you can see I've just scraped a quick screenshot from our environments.json editor. And so this is showing an example production environment, just with a few overrides in place so I can kind of go through them. So first and foremost, environment has a name. I'd recommend it to be user readable, but it does actually have an important sort of semantic meaning with respect to Dataform scheduling. We make sure that schedules are run sort of uniquely and individually, and never run alongside each other, concurrently, I should say. But that's sort of scoped to an environment name. So if you had two environments, production and staging, and they had the same schedule name, they will not be treated as the same schedule. They're completely different schedules. So you should consider sort of schedules as being scoped inside an environment name. The next sort of major setting that you configure on an environment is the Git reference, or like the version of the code that should be run. By default, this will just be master. So again, it'll just follow the latest version of your code. But you can use anything that resolves as a Git reference. So this includes any Git branch name, any Git tag that we can talk about if people are interested, or any Git commit SHA. So that's the long SHA that is auto constructed anytime you make a Git commit. Importantly, note that this is a Git branch name, not a Dataform branch name. The two are linked, but not necessarily the same. So basically, if the way to think about this is, If you're, for example, a GitHub-backed project, and you click on the branches tab in GitHub, it's that list of things that Dataform will know about and can run as a Git branch reference. Hopefully that makes sense. And then everything in this advanced options dropdown, you have to explode to see these options, really let you override the parameters that you can configure inside the dataform.json file. So you can override default database. This only applies to BigQuery or Snowflake because these are the only warehouses that let you sort of dynamically query different databases. In BigQuery, this just means your GCP project ID, and Snowflake, that means a literal database. You can change the default schema. That's the schema into which datasets are written by default. And you can override a schema suffix, which is exactly what it sounds like. So just a string that gets appended to whatever schema a dataset is being written out as. I think these are all reasonably self-explanatory, and I'll kind of go into how you might use them in the next slide.
I do have a question on, so as we're migrating to the environments feature, I think you hinted this a little bit, and I do remember talking back and forth on Slack somewhere, but we still have like our old legacy kind of prod instance, which would be kind of in our dev staging, and then we have this new prod, which is going to be part of the environments feature. So we still want both to be scheduled and run, and then probably, I don't know, pretty much the same cadence, but they would still need to be scheduled in the two different, staging and then also in production.
I want to understand more about that specific case, but let me go through the next couple of slides because I've got a couple of example configurations, and maybe that'll help answer your question. If not, we can definitely come back to it.
Okay.
Cool. All right, so like a super simple basic setup that I would recommend, this would probably suit most users, but definitely not all, is to have a single production environment and to treat your the configuration you have defined in dataform.json as your development environment, your dev environment. The reason that it's worth thinking of it that way is because any manually triggered runs that you trigger in the app will use the settings in dataform.json. So you can either just most simply, and we do recommend this if you're willing to do it, is to switch on the option in project settings, this isolate non-production runs to a development schema. And that just means that if you're in a development branch, and we're going to append like a dev suffix to your schema names, and we're going to prepend any table names with the branch name that you're currently on, basically so that like all of your development data sets are consolidated into a small number of schemas, all suffixed with dev, and then you can tell apart sort of which branch any data set may have come from by the table's prefix. That said, I know that there's some people that don't want to switch this option on. They're a bit worried about cost, and that's very reasonable. You can just override some settings inside dataform.json to kind of set it apart, set your dev environment apart from anything you might want to run in production. So you could set the schema suffix to dev, or if you're on GCP or Snowflake, maybe you just want to create a whole new database, a separate database, and you can just override default database too. And then alongside either switching on the option or making a couple of edits to dataform.json, the simple thing to do is just have a single production environment, which everyone gets by default for what it's worth. You can just peg that to the master branch. So it means every time someone commits to master, it's just going to run that version of the code. And again, you may want to configure a couple of little overrides to make sure that the data is nicely cleanly separated between dev and prod. So again, a schema suffix of prod would do, or again, if you're on GCP or Snowflake, you might want to just have a whole new clean database. That would work fine. So again, this is the simple case. It would work for most people, but maybe you want to get a bit more advanced, and maybe you want to have some kind of staged release process. So why would you want this? So imagine you're like a bigger team. Lots of changes are happening to master all the time. And also you want to take a bit of care to make sure that the data in production, let's say your pipelines in production, are always running, always up to date, and never fail because there's some conflicting problem between my change and Dan's change and Lewis's change, whatever. So the way you do this is you, as normal, you change all code changes get merged into master, where you sort of let them bake for a little while. Presumably you have some maybe acceptance tests, or you have some, you just check that the pipelines there aren't failing for a little while. And then at some point you decide that the code in master is good and green and clean to release. And so you would just migrate what's currently in staging to the production environment. So to do this, again, it's fairly simple. You can have a staging environment pegged to the master branch. That said, this environment is optional. If you want to sort of manually move, every time you commit to master, just manually move production over to that new commit, that's perfectly reasonable, feel free. It's just that I think having a staging environment explicitly there helps sort of separate out dev from staging from production, but you don't have to if you don't want it. And then your production environment, this is the important thing, is pegged to a specific Git tag or a specific commit SHA. If you've not used Git before, a Git tag is really the same as a branch name. It's a sort of a human readable name, but it's like locked to a specific commit, whereas branches obviously like move with commits as you add stuff to a branch. And a commit SHA is exactly the same as a tag, but like the specific commit, and not so human readable. You can obviously peg the production environment to, let's say, a third branch, call it like production or something. We don't recommend this. You can do it. We don't recommend this because you end up with slightly confusing Git behavior. Basically, what you end up doing is merging master to production every time you want to do a release. And if you then go and look at the difference between your master and production branches, it's going to be a bit confusing. For what it's worth, we actually did this for Dataform code for a little while, and then we decided to go with the commit SHA variant because I think it's easier for us to understand. And then in both cases, again, as in the previous slide, you can just override schema suffix or default database to avoid collisions between data in dev and production, or dev staging and production. That said, you can combine the settings that I've talked about however you like. It's entirely up to you. You can have as many environments as you want, running whatever different configurations you want, running whatever schedules you want. I know that some users have talked about wanting to have basically the same code running more or less the same configuration, but just having firstly maybe a slightly different set of tags that get run in a schedule, and also maybe running those less frequently. Again, all this stuff is super configurable. It's just up to you how you want to structure your environments and the schedules that run within them. So again, when you think about the Dataform tags that you want to run and how often they should run, so that's basically encapsulates the schedule. The different versions of the project code that you might want to run, or the different configurations of the project code. All of these three things come together, and you can decide how you want to glue them together to kind of fit your use case inside some set of environments. And we can talk about specifics if that's interesting. I wanted to very quickly cover some feature improvements that we have definitely thought about for environments, or at least related to environments. One thing that people have asked for a few times is the ability to kind of inject custom variables into environments. So while we let you kind of override, as I've said, default database, schema suffix, these sort of project configuration settings, you might want to have some arbitrary variable name that you create, and then you can reference inside your code. There's a super simple example there of what it might look like in environments.json, like a variables block with some variable name and value settings. But this is a TBD. But I know that people want this, and so I think we'll probably get to it at some point. The other thing is introspection at compile time. So like when you're writing Dataform code, obviously you have ref, resolve, etc. But when you want to refer to the current file's name, you use the self API. That's intended explicitly to prevent you having to care about writing into your code the current file's database name or table name or schema suffix or schema, like all of these things that come together to produce the whole long name. That said, we do know that there's some circumstances where that's not really enough, and we will at some point expose some better API to let you access the current file's database name, or even maybe the whole project-wide default database, for example. You can imagine both of these things coming together to produce some like cleaner overall API to let you access and inject arbitrary variables. Cool. So any questions? And also, Chris, did we help answer your question or not?
No. So, well, my question is, I'm still kind of ingesting everything, but so currently, what we do is for our production data sets, we have a database override because we have 2 projects in BigQuery. Okay. So one project is for dev and staging, one project is for user production. In the dev and staging, we have a legacy data set that was our legacy production data set. And so we moved away from that and we created, let's say, 4 new user production data sets that are visible in that production project, right? So now when we migrate, we have these 2 projects. We have 4, data sets that are user production, and then we have 1 data set that's like dev production. So we want to be able to kind of manage that. And as we phase into, fully migrating environments, there is going to be kind of obviously some phase-in period where we still have that legacy dependencies on that dev production data set that we still need to be scheduled on time. But we also want to use this new project, this new user production, and a set, the set of 4 data sets that I mentioned there. So I know there's kind of a lot, but hopefully that was kind of clear.
I think I would probably need to see it like written down or drawn out to understand.
Yeah.
But it seems like what you want, at least like for that temporary moving across stage, is a 3rd environment. Like it sounds like you want one for your new production, one for your old and also new dev stuff, and then one for your old production, which kind of sits in between the 2, and it has whatever set of configuration overrides are necessary to make it do what your old production did.
Yeah, pretty much. I think so. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's okay.
Yeah, we have 2. Yeah. I assume that you said it was pretty customizable, so sure there's a way.
We can definitely talk about like specifics if you want to, I don't know, email me or Slack us your project or something. But yeah, I think it sounds like you want 3 temporarily, then you'd get rid of that middle one once you've got all your users migrated over to the production, like the new production.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And can you limit what data sets are going to be pushed into this like other project that's production, or will all data sets in BigQuery be pushed into the production environment?
So the only things that get run in an environment are the schedules in that environment. And a schedule is just a set of tags, right? So if it's only going to run the tags that you specify.
Okay.
Or everything if that's what you want.
Yeah, that would be, I guess some tags, yeah. Okay.
Cool. But happy to talk about that in more detail if that's helpful.
Yeah, sure. We have to schedule some time, or I'll write it up, send an email.
Sure.
It's quite a cool use case for environments. I hadn't really thought about the idea that you can create a new environment that's doing some new thing that you want to do whilst having your previous environment still doing the old thing. It does make migrating to like slightly new project configurations a little bit less painful. Yeah, it's kind of cool. I hadn't thought about that as a use for environments.
I'm glad I can help.
Any more questions from anyone on the call? Cool. Easy. I'm happy to, as always, to answer any more questions. If you have any, again, ping us on Slack, email me, ben@dataform.co. Anything any question is fine. But yeah, thank you very much for joining. Dan, looks like you just unmuted. You want to say something?
I was thinking I did have a question during the slides, and I was just trying to remember it. So the bit where we get to choose between either using a tag, like a GitHub tag, or I guess GitLab probably has similar things, or a commit char. If I understand correctly, one of the differences would be that if you're using tags, you don't actually need to make any change to your Dataform project code to do a release.
No, you still do.
Oh yeah, because you're changing you're upgrading the tag number.
That's right. So like tags, you should think of tags as being like the same as a branch, but except it doesn't move the commit. So a branch, when you commit something on top of it, it moves to the next commit, it keeps moving up and up and up, right? But like a tag, once you've said git tag at this commit, is there forever. You can reset it, but it's not considered like that's a force command you have to type into the git command line. It's not considered what you should be doing. The idea is that a tag is really just a human readable name for a specific commit.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I mean, there's an interesting thing there about like whether you want to take on the manual work of updating environments.json to do that release process. That said, there are ways of automating this that make it kind of clean. For example, our release process that we have a commit SHA in our Git repo that is automatically updated by a thing that happens a couple times a day, right?
Next office hours.
Any more questions? Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.